Hello, everyone. You're listening to Talk with Angela Butler. Today, the interview is with Mr. Paul Brown III, Miss Patricia Brown Bainbridge. Their father's name is Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. He is a Vietnam veteran. We call their father. Hello, everyone. You're listening to Talk with Angela Butler. Today, the interview is with Mr. Paul Brown III, Miss Patricia Brown Bainbridge. Their father's name is Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. Can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you better now.
All right. You're getting a second. They're getting a feedback, y'all, and I apologize to the family for this. They call their father Sergeant Paul Brown Jr., a Vietnam veteran, a fallen soldier. I'm going to have to say allegedly all through this because it has not proved to be a murder, and I hope I do not offend the family at all. I'm not trying to. Hello, how are you doing, Miss Patricia?
I'm trying to hold on, me and my family, and we appreciate you taking the time to try to help me and my family because we've had a hard time. And like you say, the devil is busy because we've been trying to get help since 2017 from the time we received the call on May 29th, 2017. We found out my father was murdered. So we appreciate you taking the time to try to help us get the story out.
You're more than welcome, Miss Patricia. I call you Carol, but you said call you Miss Patricia Brown Bainbridge.
Yes, my middle name is Carol. So on Facebook, I have Carol Brown, but my full name is Patricia Brown Bamberg. Yes, ma'am, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. I want you to tell your story. I want everyone to hear a story. This is a very important interview, you all. I'm going to have to say allegedly, like I said. But talk, Miss Patricia, talk, Mr. Paul Brown III. If you're on the phone, talk, sir.
Okay, and thank you. And we are the voice for my father, Sergeant Paul Brown Jr., a Vietnam veteran, a fallen soldier who was murdered in his home on May 29th, 2017. Basically what happened, when we received the call, May 29, 2017, my aunt had called the police department, my Aunt Viola. She reached out to the police department to do a well check on my father because we kept calling his phone and he didn't answer. And the police decided to call my aunt back and stated that when they did the well check, they found my father dead in his apartment. And without the consent of me and my siblings, they went ahead and called the funeral home, a funeral home who do cremation without our consent, to get my father's body. And we was devastated. So when my aunt called my sister and my sister Ann reached out to me, I immediately reached out to the funeral home to ask them how could they go get my father's body without our consent, and we was coming up to Cincinnati, Ohio. So when I spoke with the director, at first he was like, well, okay, just let me know when you get here. So when we got to Tennessee, I remember just like it was yesterday, I was in the store.
Okay. Hold on.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to introduce her. This is Mr. Paul Brown III, Miss Patricia Brown Bainbridge. Their father's name is Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. He's a Vietnam veteran. They call their father a fallen soldier. Now, start from the beginning, please, Miss Patricia. I'm so sorry the devil is fighting me like this.
That's okay. Because I remember it just like it was yesterday. If I have to start over, I get out there. I want the world to know about who my father was. He was a man of character. He could sing. He could cook. He was a fisherman. He was just everything to us, and we just want to get justice for him. His name was Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. He was 69 years old when his life was taken. He was beaten to death in his apartment, and his penis was cut. His face was beaten. His teeth was knocking out his mouth. And basically they did him similar to what they did to Mr. Emmett Till. My father was murdered before Mr. George Floyd was. My father was murdered May 29, 2017. Mr. George was murdered May 25th, 2020. But no one never knew about my father because they tried to sweep it up on the rug. They tried to cover it up because they knew when the right people found out about it that we was going to get help and justice for my father. And they thought we was just going to forget about it. But no, we the real Browns, and that's our father, and we're not going to let this go. The first thing we acknowledge is Jesus, because we know when God is for us, who can be against us? And because my father is gone, he's gone, we're here to be the voice for him. So on this day, May 29th, 2017, when we was calling my father, it was Memorial Day, a day that my father was supposed to be honored. He was erased. And the reason why I say this, on this particular day, we was calling. He didn't answer his phone because he had a house phone and a cell phone. So my aunt, which is his sister, my Aunt Viola Brown, she reached out to the police department so they can do a well check on my father. And what a well check is, you go to the resident home, you check to see if they're okay, and then you notify the family back. This particular day, the officer called my aunt back and stated that he had bad news, that they found my father dead in his apartment, and without the consent of me and my siblings, they went ahead and called the funeral home to get my father's body, and it's a funeral home for cremation. So when my aunt called my sister and she notified me, I immediately reached out to the funeral home to ask them how could they get my father's body. We never saw the body. We never even, the family's supposed to go first to identify the body. And we're supposed to make arrangements to where we want my father's body to go. So I asked them, how could they, without our consent, just take his body like that? And I told them that we was coming up to Cincinnati, Ohio. So when I spoke with the director, he agreed. He said, okay, just let me know when you get her up here. So when I got in Tennessee, I remember just like yesterday, I was going in the store, and it was nighttime because we was driving, and we was tired, and we had to get some more gas. And I went in the store, and my little girl, Shania, she came in the store behind me, and she said, Mom, you have a phone call. And I got the phone, and I was like, hello? And he said, well, this is the director of the funeral home. I have bad news. A lady called in and stated that she was the wife, and she don't want y'all to see your father's body, and I'm so sorry, you cannot see your father. And I told him, I said, no, my father's not married. He been married to my mama, Sister Pauline Brown, for over 30 years, but they had got a divorce, and since we next in line, we're the children, we want to see our father and bring him home. And he said, nope, I'm sorry, you can't see him. I'll let you know Friday if you can see him. And he hung up the phone in my face. So much disrespect. And this was on Wednesday night. So I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, huh? So we're in Tennessee. Not only did they take the body and they moved him out of his home without our consent, we didn't even know where his body was when the funeral home director hung up in my face. So when I got the message, I went back to my car with my family, and I told them what was going on, and I said, wait a minute, he's telling us we can't see Daddy. And earlier that day, I had already spoke with the landlord over the apartment, which he was very nasty to me. He told us we couldn't come to the apartment. And I told the landlord, I said, wait a minute, by law, we're the children. We have rights to go into the apartment because I need to get the right paperwork to bury my father. He said, no, you're not going in. He said, your father acts out when he don't take his medication, and he plays the music loud and disturbs the neighbors. I'm like, what are you talking about? So with everything being said, the landlord banning us from my father's apartment, and the funeral home director telling me we can't see my father, we decided to go up anyway to get help from the police. So we kept driving. We had to go up there, and we had to wait. We had to sleep in our car. We didn't have nowhere to go because we was banned from my father's apartment. We was on the street. But we had to stay up there to the next morning to try to get help from the police. And I told the director when I was on the phone with him that we was going to the police. So he told us that he would meet us there the next day. When we got in Cincinnati, we were sleeping in our car. We went to this hotel. and we told this lady our story. She felt sorry for us because we was on the street. She gave us a discount. So all of us sleeping in one room, some of us on the floor, but we trying to wait till the next morning to get help from the police. Thursday evening, we went to the police department. I went inside, and I talked to this here guy, and I told him the situation that they took my father's body, the funeral home, and they banned us from the apartment, and we need to get help. So he said, well, just go outside and wait for an officer to come outside and speak to you. So I went back outside with my family. So it was this white officer. He had on casual clothes, no uniform. He had on some slack, kind of tan slack. He walked out with his hand in his pocket, and he said, may I help you? And I told him what had happened, I told him my father's name, and I told him my father's address and what had happened. So what he did, he got on the phone. He told me to wait 1 second. He had a flip phone, and he went on the side of the building, but I could still see him. He came there. He walked back over to us, and he said, I'm so sorry. Your father don't live there. There's nothing we can do to help you. And my family crying. I'm like, huh? So the funeral home director, he was already there sitting down because I told him we was going there. And he stood up. He put his hand in his pocket, and he said, that's bad. I'll let you know tomorrow if you can see your father. And he walked to his car. And the officer walked back inside and left us. They left us outside, and we was like, what's going on? So, again, we didn't know where his body was at the funeral home. We just had the number, and the director of the funeral home, he was there, but they took the body. So we had to stay. We went to McDonald's. I'll never forget this. And me and my family, we sat in McDonald's, and the lady was sweeping the floor. It was almost closing time. And we tried to wait there because we was on the street. We didn't have nowhere to go. Finally, she came to us. She said, I'm sorry, we're getting ready to close. Y'all going to have to leave. So, again, we got back in our car, started sleeping in our car for a while because we didn't want to leave my father. We wasn't going to leave my father. So we went back to the same hotel. They gave us another room. Again, we went through the same thing, trying to hold on to hear what the director of the funeral home had to tell us the next day. Around 1 o'clock Friday, I spoke with the director of the funeral home, and he told me, he said he's going to have a meeting to let me know when we can come over. My bad, it was 12 o'clock. It was 12 o'clock. And he said he would get back with me. Then finally he got back with me and said, okay, you can come over at 1 o'clock. He finally texted me the address. Got in the funeral home. And when at first the funeral home director told us that he didn't want us to see my father's body because he said he was so decomposed. And I said, nope, I want to see my father. So he took us to a back room. And the door opened up in the back room. And I saw my father lying down in a hospital gown. And my father, I'm sorry. When I walked up to my father, I can see his face was beaten. On the left side of his face, you can see his face was beaten. And my mom, she stood up beside him, and she had on a black jacket with white big buttons. And she was messing with the buttons on her jacket with tears coming down her eyes. Because the next day, if they would have still been married, it would have been 50 years. So I walked over to my mom, and I told my mom, I said, Mama, don't cry. Don't cry. And then I never forget, I walked up to my father, and I looked at his face, how he was beaten. And I told my father, I said, Daddy, take your rest. We got this. That's the last time I saw my father. And I looked at his body, and I went around the back of his head. And they done cut a big patch in the back of his hair. You can see the blood draining out the back of his head, how somebody done knocked him in the back of the head. Then I asked the director, could I take the sheet off of him? And he said, well, we didn't prepare for that. But he had already told me they washed him up, and they put him in a hospital gown. So he told me that I could remove the sheet. When I lifted the sheet back, I saw my father's feet. It was sliced, too. They cut his feet, and blood was draining out his back. I could see the blood draining from under the back of him. And I'm like, oh, my God, what happened to my father? So I asked the director, of the funeral home, why does my father have on a hospital gown? And he told me 2 members from his funeral home went and picked up my father's body. They washed him up. That's what he told me. And I said, what about the coroner? He said the coroner never came out. And I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? When does a situation, a man be beaten, his penis cut, and the coroner don't come to the scene? So I asked the director of the funeral home, I said, when did you pick up my father's body? And he said, Sunday night. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if we take pictures? So he said, I'm going to give y'all a few minutes. And that's when my brother, he started the video. And I took the pictures of the back of my father's head. I took the pictures of my father's feet and everything to show I knew he was murdered. So when we did that, we quickly reached out to an attorney in Cincinnati. He asked, we needed to meet with him. He notified the landlord to let us in the house. When we got in the house, we met with the landlord because they had, we couldn't get in the house for a whole week. Finally, when we did get in the apartment, they had taken all of his furniture out of the apartment. They took everything out. And I asked the landlord, I said, where's your father's stuff? They took everything.
You gained your composure. I'm glad. Miss Patricia, keep going.
So when we found out they took everything out of the apartment, the director of the funeral home told us that he didn't have a doctor to sign a death certificate, so we didn't have a death certificate. So by law, we couldn't take my father's body from the funeral home because they told us that they didn't have a doctor to sign up on the death certificate, and the coroner refused to talk to them. So I kept calling to speak with the coroner. They would never let me speak with the coroner. So my father's body was there. We couldn't do anything. We didn't have a choice but to go back home and try to get help. When we went back home, we reached out to the Nathan Ivory Show. We was on the Nathan Ivory Show reaching out for help. And we did a YouTube video. We did the YouTube video first. When we did the YouTube video, this attorney called me. I was at the post office. And he called me on my phone, and he said that he wanted to fly down and fight for our civil rights. He said my father being a VA veteran, it was wrong how they beat him to death, how they killed him, and he want to fight for our rights, and he was going to come down and help us. So we said, okay, being that we already upset that our father's been murdered and we didn't have any help, we trusted him, not just because he was an attorney, but he was a pastor. He said he was a man of God. So we trusted him. So when he came down, we were supposed to meet him in Denmark, South Carolina at Hardee's. He came down. He had on a suit, a brown suit, and he had a briefcase. So when we was in Hardee's talking to him, everybody was looking at us. And I was like, well, my mom lived across the street. I said, well, we can go to my mama's house, meet him and my brother, so we can have some privacy. So when we went to my mama's house, and she opened the door, the first thing he said, Sister Brown, he knew my mother as a child growing up in the same church, but he moved away. And so we trusted him even more, thinking, okay, God done sent us somebody who used to go to church with my mama, somebody who grew up in a holiness church. We thinking he's a pastor, he's a man of God, he's going to help us. So what he told us, he said, I need your father's medical records to find out more information about him. And what we're going to do, we're going to bring charges, we're going to get it investigated, find out what happened to your father. He told us everything. So he said he was going to be in a parade over the weekend. And I had all my father's medical records, but I couldn't give him the original. So we agreed to meet that Saturday. So what I did, we had to pay for the medical records, and I had over 1,100 copies. And my grandmother, which is my father's mother, Amy Brown Harley, she was living at the time. And I never forget, I called my grandmother, and I said, Grandma, we have to make these copies. And I said, we need some extra money to help with the copies. And it was a Friday, because we were supposed to meet with him the next day. She was like, baby, come on by the house. So I went by Friday night, and my grandmother, Amy Harley, she was walking slowly down the hallway out her bedroom, and she had the money folded up. And she put the money in 7 folders in my hand. And she said, here, baby. And I said, thank you, Grandmama. I said, Grandma, we're going to get him home. And she said, Patricia, I know you're going to get him home, baby. And my grandmama hugged me. And so when I walked at that house thinking, okay, we got some help. We got justice. You know, somebody's going to come in and help find out what happened to our father. We met him in Orangeburg at the motel. He came out. We done made the copies, 1,100 copies. We put them in a box, and we gave him the box. And he said that he was going to get back with us and let us know what's going to happen. But during that time, we were supposed to be on the Nathan Ivey show, the talk show. So we trusted him. So we felt since he was part of us, why not let him speak for us? Mr. Nathan Ivey was so nice. He was in Cincinnati, Ohio, on the talk show. We had the attorney to get on with us, and he forwarded all the numbers, all the calls to his number. So, again, we trusted him. So time went by, and the attorney got distant, and I'm like, what's going on? He's not reaching back out to us. What's really going on? Because here's something been going on a year and a half, no death certificate. We're trying to get some help for someone to present a death certificate for a doctor to sign it, and we were depending on this attorney to help us out and to get our story out there to get help. But everything was a standstill. So finally, something just told me to reach out to the courthouse because the attorney said he filed a civil suit against everyone who took part in it. And I'm like, okay. I called the courthouse, and they said, we never heard of this attorney, and nothing was never filed. I'm like, huh? So we got on a 3-way conference, me, my brother Paul Brown III, and the attorney. And he said, and the courthouse, they're lying, and I have the death certificate. I said, huh? It's been a year and a half. What death certificate? My father's body is sitting there because we have no knowledge of a death certificate. We're trying to get a doctor to check my father to do an autopsy. So what are you talking about? He said, you're going to be mad. They said if you gave them the medical information, and I'm going to send you a copy of the death certificate on your phone. And I was like, how could you do it? Oh, my God, we trusted you. Not only are you an attorney, we trusted you mostly because you said you're a man of God. How could you know that my father was murdered and beaten and keep a death certificate from me and my family for a year and a half? And the funeral home knew about it, too. So I called the funeral home, and I said, I'm devastated. My father's there. My father's body is there. And I was told you have a death certificate, and a white lady answered the phone. And I said, do you have a death certificate for my father? She said no and slammed the phone in my face. So I said, okay, I'm going to reach out to the health department. Call the health department. And I told them, my name is Patricia Brown Bamberg. I'm the administrator over my father, Sergeant Paul Brown Jr., and I'm devastated because I just found out you filed a death certificate for my father saying that I was the informant. And I never knew a death certificate existed. She was very nasty to me. Basically, she hung up in my face. So I knew she was involved, too, the health department, too. So then weeks went by. Finally, the funeral home called me back, another director. He was very nasty. And he said, we could have been took your father's body. I said, wait a minute. Hold up. Do you have a death certificate for my father? He said, yeah. I said, could you send it to me? So the second one was email. The first one was typed. The second one was handwritten, but no seal on the death certificate. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on? So I have 2 different death certificates. One typed, one is just handwritten. So I'm like, okay, let me go to the VA because my father is a VA veteran, and I know they take care of the veterans. So I went to the VA personally myself.
Yes.
I spoke with the VA. They gave me a third death certificate. Oh, they said, ma'am, I'm sorry, this death certificate don't even exist. The doctor never signed his death certificate. So I'm standing there, and I'm dizzy. I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Hold up. You telling me what I have in my hand is not even real? She said, no, ma'am. The death certificate, she said the only time the doctors from the VA get involved if my father would have died under their care in the hospital or if he was up under doctor's care. My father haven't seen a doctor in over a year. And that's what I got from his medical records. So I'm standing there now with 3 different death certificates. I found out the attorney was working with the funeral home. So everything was a setup, and I'm like, oh, my God. They murdered my father, and they covered his murder up. So then when the funeral home found out I had 3 different death certificates, it gets worse. We waited. We didn't hear nothing from the funeral home.
Lord have mercy.
I had a dream about my father.
Lord have
I had
mercy.
a dream that my father was running around the circle in Barnwood, South Carolina, kissing everybody, kissing my mom, kissing me. And in a dream, I said, what's going on? And they said, well, your father, they're having his funeral. So when I woke up, I called my brother. I said, wait a minute. The funeral home done got quiet. I just had a dream about Daddy. Let me call the courthouse again. So I got on the phone again, and I told him my name. I said, my name is Patricia Brown Bamberg, and I'm calling on behalf of my father, Paul Brown, Jr. She said, ma'am, it was a guy, my bad. It was a white guy. He said, ma'am, we have a court date. The funeral home has a court date for the remains of your father's body, December the 3rd, 2019. I said, what? A court date? Say, yes, they want the remains of your father. I'm like, we was never served. How can you take my father's body? How can you have a court date and we never get served about it? So I told my brother, and again, we had to hit the road again. They didn't even know we was coming. We drove all night back to Ohio, showed up to court at Cincinnati Courthouse. They had court in a small room in the back. Everybody was white except me and my brother and one director of the funeral home. Everybody else was white. So the judge, she was a white female. She was an older lady. When she saw me and my brother, she started shaking when she was reading the paperwork. We came into the courtroom, and guess what? The main person we needed was there with us, God. Because when God is for you, who could be against you? So when we walked in there, we had to study the laws of Ohio. And when we presented everything, and I talked to the judge, she was very nasty to me and my brother. And I told her the death certificate don't even exist. And I told her that they took the body, and I told her everything. And the main thing, my father, they labeled my father as a VA veteran, mentally ill. And in the state of Ohio, if a person is mentally ill, regardless when he went on that scene and they saw his body, regardless of that, the coroner was supposed to come out. The coroner was supposed to get my father's body. They were supposed to do an autopsy on my father, but that didn't happen. And I told the judge, because an autopsy was supposed to be done at the scene, they broke the law. They broke the color of law. And the color of law is when a person works for any kind of, if they work for any kind of government agency, they're supposed to serve and protect every citizen. When they break the law for their own personal use, they broke in the color of law. And I explained to the judge that my father's body was taken from us. He was beaten to death. The coroner didn't come out to the scene. They refused to do an autopsy. And they took the body from us. And my father was frozen in the funeral home 2.5 years.
Oh,
they
my
made
God.
a fake death certificate. My father was frozen 2.5 years. And a lot of people didn't even know about our story. And they're trying to keep it covered up. And they thought it was going to be covered up. But like I said, when God is for you, who could be against you? No one. So back to the courthouse. When I told the judge that, she was very nasty. When I told her the paperwork, the death certificate wasn't real, she looked at the director of the funeral home. She said, "Is the death certificate real?" He said, "Yes, give it to her." She said, "Now you got one." She said, "I give you 7 days to get the body." She said, and it was on a Tuesday. And, you know, the weekend, you don't have any help. She said, "When I come back here on next Tuesday, if the body's not gone, the funeral home can have him. And they don't have to pay for nothing. You have to pay for everything." And I'm looking like, what? You give us 7 days to get my father's body, and the weekend is coming up. In her mind, she was thinking they would never get the body. I'll make them think that they're winning, but I'm putting them in a situation that they lose it all around. But what she don't know who we know. She don't know that we know God. She don't know when God is for you, He will open up doors that she don't understand. That's what happened. So when she gave us 7 days to get the body, my brother stood up because she told me to stop talking.
What?
She didn't even let me finish talking. And my brother stood up, and he said, my brother Paul Brown III, he said, "You ain't going to let me talk? My father's a VA veteran, and you going to do him like that?" The judge had the police to come in and escort us out. Told the police, "Get them out of here," like we were some dogs. And when they was escorting us out like dogs, we was by the elevator, and I'll never forget. We were standing up waiting for the elevator to open, and it was 2 white officers. One of them was real tall. I had the tallest one. He was standing by me smirking. He had a smirk on his lap, but he just don't know about God. And this white lady came up to me, my brother, and she said, "I appreciate what you're doing for your father. That's a good thing that you're doing for your father." So when the elevator opens, we knew we didn't have any time, no time to wait, because we knew we had until that Tuesday. So we couldn't even go to sleep. We had to go get my kids, get my mama, because she was watching my children. We had to get back on the road and drive another 12 hours to try to get help. They just thought that we wasn't going to get my father's body. So how you going to take my father's body and do what you wanted to my father?
Lord.
They had the address where they was going to bury my father in Cincinnati, Ohio. But we said, no, we're not going to let that happen. So what we did, I called a funeral home.
Miss Patricia,
Mm-hmm.
haven't you recorded all these people?
Yes, I have them on recording.
Now go back to telling it. It's legal to record in Ohio, isn't it?
It's legal, yes. If you're on the phone, you can record somebody. I have the investigator telling me there was not going to be a funeral. I even have the witness telling me him and the officer put my father's body in the van, and the coroner never came out to the scene. Yes. So back to the courthouse. Keep in mind, we only had 7 days to get my father's body, or the judge was going to give his body to the funeral home. And I had already told her we was never served of the court date. I just had a dream, and I happened to call the courthouse. That's how God works. So when I got in South Carolina, me and my family, my brother, he called a coroner. I called a funeral home in Ohio. They went and got my father's body. We had to pay money to remove my father's body from the funeral home. We had to pay $4,000 for a private autopsy, which when it came back, the doctor said it was homicide. The doctor said the scene was disturbed because my father was beaten to death. And the thing about it, when the scene, you can see piece of the door is up under my father's body. So that means when whoever was beating him,
you have pictures. You have pictures.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You have pictures of that.
Yes, I have it, and it's on Facebook. Yes, ma'am.
Warriors, okay.
So when we found out it was homicide, again, I called the police department in Cincinnati. I called the prosecutor. None of them would help us. It was like they was passing us on. Finally, the district attorney from Cincinnati, along with the FBI, called me on a conference call that lasted over an hour. They said they was going to get back with me. They said they might open up an investigation. They haven't done anything. So I did call the FBI back, the lady back again. She was real nasty to me, and I said, did you talk to the witness? I haven't talked to the witness yet. I said, are you going to open up an investigation? Because I feel by me having a witness saying him and the officer put my father in the van in the corner, didn't come out, that's enough to open up the investigation. She said, no, it's not. I said, what? So you're telling me that when a witness comes forward telling me that they put my father in the van on a Saturday before Monday, meaning when my Aunt Viola made that call, my father's body was already gone. They had already killed him. So that's not an accident. That was the intent. When you plan something, that was the intent. So why wouldn't the investigation be open? She said, well, I'll let you know if we're opening up the investigation. I have yet to hear from her or the district attorney from Ohio. I have had many attorneys that I've reached out to, civil rights attorney, thinking, okay, they're going to help me. They believe in justice. They fight for Black Lives Matter. When I called them, they told me, no, we're not doing nothing. And some of them never called me back. And I feel they don't want to do it because they don't want to get involved, either their friends, with some of the people that's involved, the grease is too hot for them, or they just don't want to do what they're supposed to do, fight for justice. So you can pretend and say, okay, I believe in civil rights matter. I believe in Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But if you see a man dead on the floor in his apartment, regardless of his color, and you see his penis cut, his face been beaten, his teeth knocked out of his mouth, his hand in a surrender position, his head down, you telling me that you don't know to come and stand up for the family, and you talking about you fight for justice, civil rights, and I come to you, me and my family, and I plead to you, hey, help me, and you turn the other cheek.
His pants was down.
His pants was down, and his penis was cut, like he used to do in the old days. Because he was dating a white female. When he was living in Cincinnati, he was dating this female, and they broke up. They was never married. He was married to my mama for over 30 years, but him and my mom got a divorce. But still, this is our father. You can't just take my father's body and do what you want to do with it. That's wrong. That's just completely wrong. And my brother, Paul Brown Jr., Paul Brown III, he's here.
Even though she has all this on the screen and all the pictures and all the proof, it's still allegedly, everyone.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Allegedly. I hate to say this. I hate to insult the family. I hate to insult them. I really do. I've known Miss Carol. She told me to call her Carol. Her name is Miss Patricia. Miss Patricia Brown Bangberg. Her husband died. This family is going through hell. You hear me? They are going through hell. This family is catching hell. Can you imagine having all that recordings and photos and no one representing you? Having all that proof. Tell them about the death certificate. Tell them how you came across it.
This is Elder Brown, her son, his son.
How did you find the death certificate?
I'll come back up to the death certificate.
Yes.
As we started, as my sister stated,
I can't hear you.
I said, as my sister stated, we were banned from the funeral home to start off when we first got there. And then they said he didn't live in the apartment. But we got the pictures from the coroner's office. They standing over the body reading the ID with his body on the floor in the ground, in the apartment, in the dark. Yeah. And then after they did that, they deterred us. And like she said earlier, the officer came out and told us there was nothing they could do. And he didn't even work for the department that we were at. As we kept on going, the light bulb went off. They said they went and checked the apartment, and they came in the apartment because he could see him on the floor as he cracked the door. But the pictures say a different story. The pictures, the door was broke off, but the door was broke off, and the door was underneath his foot. So if the door was underneath his foot, he had to be alive when they opened the door. So the pictures contradict everything that they said. And then they begin to use time, the statute of law, and if you don't activate a case, then they get away with the statute of limitation. So they don't address the situation because they know that they had done murdered him and they wasn't looking for us to come. And when we came, see, I'm a retired from the federal prison and the state prison and a degree in criminal justice as well, and a pastor. So we found ourselves, the same people that's supposed to be protecting us, they were the ones that commit the crime. They were the ones using time in their position to deter us from doing the most simplest thing is just coming to have a funeral for our father that they said he died in medical, but the picture's so different. And the coroner's office, the investigator from the coroner's office said he was told it wasn't going to be a funeral when he had never talked to the family. Before we ever got there, he done said somebody done tell him it wasn't going to be a funeral without even talking to us. And then they moved the body and sent it to Spring Grove from the beginning when they knew we existed. But according to their law, when they walked upon the scene, they were supposed to call the coroner right then because his body was beaten, his pants was down, and his penis was cut. And they law said if you find that situation, you don't even supposed to check the ID. You're supposed to call the coroner, and he's supposed to come and check the scene and do the forensics. So they broke the law from the beginning. Then they said he died in medical when what medical? If nobody checked the body, the coroner never came out and the doctor hadn't seen him in a year and a half. How could he die in medical and he never been to the hospital? They was deterring the situation before we ever got there. So we find ourselves back against the wall. The people that we thought was going to help us did not help us. Then we find out that the death certificate, the reason that we couldn't move the body from the beginning because nobody came to check the body. In order for the VA doctor to check the body, he had to be in his care and check it within 24 to 48 hours. So they didn't have a VA to check it. And he'd been in the VA facility earlier that year, but when they sent him home, they knew he was a mental case. So according to the law, a mental person was automatically supposed to get an autopsy. But because they came and because they were the ones that turned the situation, they were the ones who committed the situation, they was pushing it away so it don't be addressed. But we came back to address the situation because pictures don't lie. They got some pictures taken that's in the dark when it's supposed to be 2 o'clock in the daytime. And yet, you can't see the body until you check the picture real good. You can see them standing over the body with the ID, and he on the floor naked in a surrender position. And yet they said he died in medical. How you? If he died in medical, why go through all those problems? Why hold us up? Why borrow us from the funeral home?
Why were the police there anyway?
Huh?
Why were the police there anyway, Mr. Paul?
The police were there. They made up an incident as if they were there. But they talked to us, and then they still called the funeral home to come get the body without even waiting till we called them back. The only reason they could be there because they were part of the situation from the beginning. If they weren't part of the situation, they would have followed protocol. Protocol is when they came in the place, they were supposed to call the coroner. He was to come and check the body.
Okay. All right.
Even if the officer was on the scene when he came in the door and he saw the penis cut and the pants down in a surrender position, he was supposed to call the coroner right then. Now, ain't no part in that is medical. And if it was medical, they ain't even had a doctor to check the body at all. He never signed a death certificate. So the lawyer flew down here while me and my sister was in the car talking. He called us and said he seen the the video we put out, he wanted to come down here and assist us. And I believed him because he was a pastor. My sister said, something ain't right. I said, no, he's a pastor. He's a minister. I know he's going to do the right thing. But when he got down here, he deterred us and he held us up for a whole year. And then he called my sister talking about, you ain't going to like this here because there is a death certificate. So the same stuff that she gave him, the VA record, he took it back and put it on the death certificate as that what he died for. So what was in the medical record is the cause of death on the death certificate.
Okay.
And then when they took us to court to take the body, in the document, the court document, they said that he had said that he wasn't our lawyer ever since that September. And yet he's still with us all the way to June, pulling us along, sending us probate papers, telling us sign the paper so he can move into court for us. And the whole time he's working for the funeral home.
The whole time he's working for the funeral home. Lord have mercy.
That's right. And they thought we just gonna let it go. But guess what? Everything got a trail. And we ain't ignorant individuals. So the death certificate, they never had a death certificate. They pretended to have a death certificate. And they took us to court pretending to have a death certificate, trying to make rules up to take the body from us.
So how did you get the death certificate?
Good question. Back to the attorney. What happened when I called the courthouse to speak with them about when the attorney said that he filed a civil suit against everyone that was involved, and when the courthouse said they never heard of that attorney and nothing was never filed, I got on a conference call, me, my brother Paul, and the attorney, and I was telling him what the court people told me. He was like, well, they're lying, and I had a death certificate. And I said, what death certificate? So we were just holding a conversation, and he happened to slip up and mention the death certificate a year and a half later. While we were trying to get help for someone to do an autopsy, for a doctor to sign a death certificate, he already knew about the death certificate. And we had no knowledge of it. So when he sent it to me on my phone, and it was typed with no field, which I have all the text messages that he sent to me. He talking about he was going to try to fight this, talking about other people fight it. And I'm like, how could you do this to us? You going to beat us down while we already drowning? And we had another situation. Other people came to us, and we thought that was on our side, and it was working against us. I had a situation that this lady from Cincinnati had me on her talk show, and she had an attorney with her. She called me telling me that she had an attorney that he wanted her to reach out to me. He wanted to help. So, okay, we were supposed to go live and have a conference. And we had the conference, me and the attorney and her, but it was hard for my brother to get in to the conversation, to the conference. So I'm sitting there, and I found out the attorney was talking against me, and I'm like, wait a minute. Hold up. Are you trying to help us? Or are you trying to hurt us? So when he hung up, because he was real nasty, he hung up in my face. I was still on Zoom.
Oh, my God.
I could still hear his voice. And I heard him in the background. She ain't got nothing. We good. You know, like when you take, Hold on. Let me get my thoughts together. He told the girl, you know how you take a car to the junkyard and let it set? That's what happened to her father. He compared my father to a car in the junkyard. So when I was still on the phone,
they don't
not only was he an attorney, he was supposed to be a prosecutor for Cincinnati. Yes. So I trusted him, thinking he ran for a prosecutor. So I'm trusting him, thinking, okay, he's going to really help me because he believes in justice. He believes in what's right. And the conference call on the outside of this attorney doing us wrong too, the conference call that I had over a year ago with the FBI from Cincinnati, with the district attorney and the United States attorney calling me, and I recorded everything, calling me on a conference call for a whole hour. I'm thinking they're going to help me. And I got back to the lady, the FBI lady, she's going to tell me, we don't just call people investigating them unless it's an open investigation. And the first thing I thought about, well, why were you talking to me? If it wasn't an investigation, why would you call my phone and ask me what happened if it wasn't being investigated? So they was hoping that, you know what, let's see what she got to say. But when they realized that we had all the evidence, me and my brother, to show that my father was murdered, and it was a conspiracy because the district attorney for Cincinnati, Ohio, said that it feels like it was a conspiracy, but can we prove it? So if you feel it's a conspiracy, then why haven't you opened an investigation? Why haven't you stepped up to the plate to bring these people down, these giants? Because you know it's a lot of people sitting in high places that don't supposed to be there. And they know when they do go to these people in this town, it's going to be trouble. And they trying to prevent that. They don't even care about my father.
Yes,
but we want justice for my father.
And your
father, a 69-year-old man in his home, minding his own business, and they came there, and I feel they knocked the door down, and they took his life. And the reason why I feel that, in the medical records, because it's 1,100 copies, I saw in the medical records, and this was after he died when we could get access to his medical records, that the police, they was coming to my father's house, picking him up, seemed like every month, taking him to the VA on lockdown, and the landlord. And my father was getting over $5,000 a month. I feel they was taking his money. And they figured he was on lockdown, they can take all of his money. Because he told my sister if something was to happen to him, to let the VA know. And he said that he thought someone was stealing his money. He told my sister Ann that. So we put two and two together, and we felt like, okay, I felt this night, since the landlord said my father was playing music, because he was a very good singer. And I feel he was playing his music on Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and they came to his house to try to take him to the VA again, and he got sick of it, and he opened it halfway. They presented themselves as the police, but when he opened that lock halfway, he saw who it was. No one had on a uniform, and when he proceeded to close that door, they knocked it down, and they beat him down. And they knew they couldn't report it because they was out of uniform. They killed him. Because the reason why I feel that the police was involved, if you come on the scene, like my brother Paul said, and you open the door, and you see a man dead on the floor, his face beaten, his pants down, his penis cut, his arm is surrendered, you're not supposed to touch nothing. The law says you're not supposed to let no one around the scene. You're supposed to tape off that scene. The first thing you're supposed to do, and the only thing that you can do, is call the coroner. The coroner is supposed to come get the body. Where's the coroner? Where's the justice, and where's the honor? There's no coroner, there's no justice, and there's no honor. My father was a Vietnam veteran with a Purple Heart. And on a day he was supposed to be honored, he was erased. And they thought, okay, they will just get away with it. But my aunt, when she made that call, and we came up there, we had a chance to get justice for my father, and that's what we're doing now.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're not going to let this go. And all the people, which I'm not going to call any names, a lot of attorneys that I spoke with, and some of them I talked to personally, that believe that they so-called believe in Black Lives Matter and justice, they didn't do nothing. They didn't even have the decency to call me and my family back. Why? Because this is a real case. And anybody really believing in justice and Black Lives Matter, they would step up to the plate and say, listen, I'm going to fight for Mr. Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. right, because he was a man in his apartment who was beaten to death. They knocked his eye out the socket. When I saw my father's body, I knew by looking at him, he went through it. And I could just feel his spirit when they was beating him. He was saying, don't worry, my kid's coming. Don't worry. And we here. We're not going nowhere. We're not going nowhere. And they thought, okay, they're going to let it go. No, we're not letting nothing go. We're just beginning.
There's no statute of limitations as far as I know.
No, there's no statute of limitation for murder.
For murder.
And I recently found out, now I talked to the witness, like I said earlier, and I found out this last year that he told me that it was only one officer there at the scene. So on the incident report, the officer put the fire department, everybody. All of that's a lie because he said the fireman was there on that Monday. I spoke with him personally. He don't even remember what happened. So if the body was taken that Saturday before that Monday, how could the incident report even exist? Everything was a lie. Because I done talked to the witness who took my father's body out. And he said, yep, nobody was there but one officer. Said, we picked your father up off the floor, and they put him in the funeral home van. And I said, what about the coroner? Said the coroner never came out to the scene. Where's the situation a coroner don't come out? That a coroner don't even call you.
Yeah, yes,
no, it's wrong. Never talk to them. They kept hanging up in our face and told me not to never call back there again. And I'm like, what? And the only thing we want to know, wait a minute, why you didn't come out to the scene? Because by law, you were supposed to get my father's body. But you didn't. So we have all these officers, and majority at Corrigan Township Police Department, majority of the officers are white. I'm not prejudiced. I like all colors. But I'm just calling it like it is. I'm not sugarcoating nothing. I feel it was a hate crime. They went back to the days of when a white man or when a black man go with a white woman, because my father was dating a white female, and they broke up. But I feel it was a hate crime, because that's my opinion. They cut his penis to let us know, guess what? You're not going to date no white woman in our town. That's what I feel happened.
That's how you feel, right?
Just like you did Emmett Till.
His girlfriend, the lady, what did she say to you?
She refused to talk to us. She's married. She is married. The thing about her is when the funeral home director called me and told me that she called the funeral home director telling him that we can't see the body, who called her? After I talked to the landlord, I got that call. So everything was a setup. I feel the landlord went there with the police and their friends, and the police was off duty, and they went to my father's apartment, and they knocked on that door. He opened it halfway, and when he proceeded to close that door back, they pushed it open, and they hold him down, and they beat him, they cut his penis, and they tried to get rid of the body. Because how could you take the body on a Saturday? You don't notify the coroner. You just call some random man who works at the funeral home to put my father in a van. He was never pronounced dead by any legal person of authority. You cannot. My father could have been alive when he was in that van. He could have been in a coma. So how can you just take the body on a Saturday, no coroner, no paramedic, you just put it in the van, and you go ahead, and they had to go ahead and do an autopsy because they put it on the paperwork, and they lied to the judge saying I gave them permission. How could I give them permission to do an autopsy, to embalm my father when we didn't get them permission to take the body? And the funeral home bill is $62,000. But they told the judge, and we have that in writing, they don't want the money at this time. They want the body. What gives you the right to take my father's body?
They still want the body.
They still want the body. And they're still upset because they figure somebody out there going to really believe in justice, going to come and help us and to resume my father's body to find out what really happened.
All right. Okay.
And I appreciate you taking the time to interview
Welcome.
me and my brother.
Ask a lot of questions. Let you talk and get it out there. I do hope you find an attorney. This family needs an attorney desperately.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So please, somebody represent them to help them for an hour, this interview. About at an hour, those of you who hear this interview, please.
Thank you.
The attorneys that you know through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or call them up yourself. This family needs help. They believe their father was murdered. I say allegedly to protect myself. I have all the paperwork, everything. I've studied it, I've read it, and it's pretty bad. So thank you, Mr. Paul Brown III, Miss Patricia Brown Baines, Elder Brown. Thank you for coming on Show Talk with Angela Butler. I'll talk to you in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Hi, everyone. You've been listening to the Queen of Show Talk, Angela Butler. You heard Mr. Paul Brown III, and you heard Miss Patricia Brown Baines. The father's name is Sergeant Paul Brown Jr. This happened in South Dakota. Ohio. I believe it happened in Ohio. Mr. Sergeant Paul Brown Jr., Vietnam veteran, is called a fallen soldier by his children and family. They believe their father was murdered, and I still have to say allegedly. All right, everyone, listen to the interview and share it.